Good morning, everybody. This is the Podman Community Cabal meeting. Today is Thursday, September 16th, 2021. We've got a number of topics to talk about today. I'm going to share just real quickly the HackMD that we have. I'm going to be taking notes on this during the day, during the meeting. So if you see something wrong there, please let me know. And we've got the attendees list there. If you have not yet, please go ahead and sign yourself up there. I would appreciate that. For the topics today, we are going to be talking about the Podman Desktop and then also the Podman Machine volume mounts. And I just wanted to touch real quick before we get too far. There's a couple, well, actually this main link right here. One of the things that we were going to talk about, but we've pushed out to the next meeting, was how to build an image with a template file. And there's a pretty good proposal from Stellar Power out on our builder issues. So we'll be talking about that at the next meeting, but it would be a worth a read for everybody here before that time, at least a quick glance to see what he's talking about. And basically, he wants to use YAML files to build images. So it's kind of a neat concept and something we'll be thinking about. So that all said, I'm going to open up the forum for the Podman Desktop. And Dan, do you want to start us off? Or Brent, or who's going to start us up?
I'm happy to.
Yeah, why don't you take it, Brent?
All right, cool. This topic has obviously exploded over the last 2 weeks, given changes in the market and pricing policies with Docker specifically. So we have this Podman machine, and it's primarily a CLI interface, or it is entirely just like Podman right now. And while actually a lot of people would prefer the desktop experience be CLI like that, for some of the feedback we've heard equal or more feedback that people do want some form of a desktop integration. The biggest thing that's been requested for is some sort of status as to whether the VM is running or not, and potential controls like stop and start as being the key things that people are pointing out. And so we wanted to kind of solicit the community and others as to what they think. And one of the reasons for doing this, and not just go ahead and knock something out, is we're trying to see if there's not any way we could do some form of a GUI that would work on multiple operating systems. And we also sort of have this methodology where if we just do what Docker Desktop does today, then we didn't have an opportunity to really improve the experience and put the Podman spin on it. So in that light, we really would like to, whatever we do, we would like it to be better than Docker Desktop, to fill in features and things that people wanted that just haven't been integrated into the Docker Desktop. And I think pretty much along those lines. So we wanted to open conversation on what people think, what people want to see, what's most critical, and so forth. So we'll open it up there.
And before we open up too quickly, I just want to point out, and I've added in the notes, there is a issue set up for this with some discussion already for Podman Desktop inside GitHub. So returning back to the discussion points.
Yeah. One thing we've heard, I believe, is that we want to make sure that Podman stays as a CLI tool, and then desktop is just a wrapper on top of it. So my thinking is that we would have a Podman Desktop package that would somehow also install the Podman package as it is now. And then that way, if people don't want the desktop, they wouldn't get it. One critical feature I also think for the desktop would be the ability to check and update the CoreOS, so the operating system basically to help maintain the lifetime of that operating system inside of the VM.
Yep.
So on the call here are several people who had experience with, for instance, what we did for Docker Machine, like Anders Hausberg, me with Minishift, Ravine. What we did notice is people do want a desktop application that integrates well and can be considered a first-class citizen. One of the things that we do, of course, you already mentioned some form of indication that it's up and running, it's available, the start and stop. But then you also start to talk about, what about reinitialization? Because there might be a situation where you not just want to stop, but you want to start from a clean slate. It should be considered ephemeral. And then you start to talk about all the problems that might come from that, because then all of a sudden that whole VM state becomes way more relevant. And is that something you really want? Also, is it going to be a tray application or a desktop app that augments your view? And for us, that was kind of like the idea. If it's a tray application, you want to start very easily a developer prompt, because that's kind of the feeling you want on a Windows environment. Setting up your path and immediately have commands like Podman available, and therefore augment the CLI tool, etc. So,
Very good points. Very good points. So maybe you guys can help us settle some of the debates on that. I mean, that's sort of what we're looking. That's sort of what we're looking for too, collectively.
Go ahead, Gerard.
oh no, please, Daniel, first, because I do have some questions, but I want to hear what others also think.
I mean, one of the things we're also hearing is we saw in the whole blow up, everybody's sort of like, oh, this works. This is kind of cool. Let me try Compose against it. And then Compose blows up because we don't expose the socket. Now, exposing the socket all the time is, there's a risk factor to that. Also, there's potential for 4 different sockets from a Podman point of view, because there's a libpod socket and a Docker socket, and then there's a rootless and rootful. So it's 4 combinations. So do we put that into the desktop to allow people to specify which socket they want to have leaked into the user space? Other things, there is configuration files inside of the VM that users might want to modify, such as registries.conf. Do we want to expose some of that stuff to the user? Basically the configuration of that VM.
So I think it drills down from what is the initial goal? What is the user story you want to work on or look at first? Because when I saw, for instance, Hey Vito's tray application, I think, well, sure, looks interesting. It's well integrated. It shows the containers that are running inside that VM, or at least from the Podman environment. But it's going to be very information dense in the sense of, what if you have 10, 20 containers running? Would you show them all? And therefore, what kind of view would you want to have, for instance? And if I look at the stuff that, for instance, Garrett Lesage did with Cockpit, I would imagine that would be an application, a dialogue, some detailed view on stuff, but it's too much information maybe to what you really want. But it does expose things you want, being able to go into a container, performing queries on logs and all that kind of stuff. So I think the first question would be is, besides it should be able to deal with Podman, what do you want it from Podman to do?
My personal take at this point was that obviously we're in line with your thinking in the sense that we'll creep up on it a little bit, but knowing the larger story, the things people want, help us make decisions that we don't in the future regret, because we're trying to do then some new thing that we can't because of the previous decision. So in that case, you try to, at least we would like to try to know all the different things that people are contemplating, so that we don't misstep on our way to get there. So do other people follow suit with some of the things Gerard has mentioned in terms of, do you want to be able to see status of your containers and interact with them?
Well, that's the point. We've been trying to expose Podman for quite a while from CRC's perspective, but we have not really pursued further. And this is, for me, I want to understand what we could do in the sense of what do people really want, so we provide that functionality. And I think it's beneficial for us to figure that out, not to having to reinvent the wheel, but benefit from each other. But so far, I haven't heard compelling reasons or things from people what they really want to see from there. So as the example I saw from Hevito, it makes sense to see your containers, but that depends on how big your application is. If you're having a very small application, a single or two containers, it might make sense. But if you're talking about a large deployment of multiple microservice architecture with different services in different domains, that might not scale well. That might not be the view you want. And therefore, I think there's no golden midway. There's no single solution to this. But what do people want as the first start, maybe? And then not blocking them to look further.
I'll chime in as a user, not as a product manager, but just as a user, like somebody that imagining myself using like Podman for Mac or Podman for Windows. Like back to Dan's point, like I probably want functional thing. Like I know as an end user, I want functional things. Like I want to just be able to run the Docker Compose command and it works. Now, the reason why it may work may be because by default, there are 4 different sockets on the system. There's, rootless, rootful, as a user, not as a user. Like, 2 Podman sockets and basically 2 Docker sockets to be able to one that's rootful and rootless for each of them. But I might not want to know that, right? Like I would argue 95% of users just wanted to probably connect to the root Docker socket, maybe. I don't know. Maybe that's the default. But then as like a power user, I probably want to do something like WSL2, where you can do like a WSL2 list, and it shows you all the machines that are running it. It shows you like a star next to the one that is like the default. And then a power user may be like, oh, I want to create a more secure container where I'm using rootless so that I'm not using like the wrong UIDs and things like that, so that when I go to run it in Kubernetes or OpenShift, the security context doesn't fail, right? Like I may want to have some way that I can run it in a more secure way that it would match what would be in production, so I don't get bumped out. I go to put this container in production and ops team tells me, oh, you built this thing insecurely. Like, so there's some balance in my mind of like secure by default though. So we're like using the right socket that would limit them enough, but not allow things to blow up all the time. Have that be a default, but then have a power user option to show other things. I think, and I bring that up specifically because it's like one container, not microservices. I as a user of Podman probably am not thinking of using it for like massive, like 12 services in a microservices app. If I'm that far down the road, I'm probably doing Kubernetes.
Yeah. See, I would like to break or at least the model apart. So I think that I see the desktop is managing the connections. So, and this might be too internal, but Podman is really the Podman that runs on a Mac is Podman Remote. So it is connecting to VMs or is connecting to the internet. So what I want to do is I want to be able to manage my connections via the desktop. And then if I want to manage Podman or manage the containers that are running inside of a specific connection, maybe that launches an application at that point. So that launches the cockpit view of the application. That might be exactly how we would want to do it, because we have cockpit. We basically could have cockpit fire up your web browser with cockpit into the actual VM that's running, and you run the Podman's local inside of the standard cockpit inside of our VM. But I'm thinking more. One of the things we failed with Podman and Podman on Mac originally is we've had Podman on Mac for a while, but it was the user had to figure out how to connect to a Linux box to get the experience. And Podman Machine makes that, we hide all that stuff behind the scenes. So it might be that this app is really just about managing the VM and other connections. So if I want Podman to be able to connect to different services, maybe a cloud service, maybe a Podman service running in my local environment or inside of a different VM. Right now we have it hard coded to pull down one specific VM, but I could see in the future people saying, okay, I want to run it against an Ubuntu VM or a RHEL VM.
Which might not even run locally, but maybe even remotely.
Right.
That's
Exactly.
what you're referring to. Right. It's
Exactly.
a springboard to configurations.
Right.
Connections. Right.
Yeah, I'd add one that you didn't quite highlight specifically, Dan. I think like the proxy connections too for network web developer, right? Like, okay, where does this thing map on my local host? Is it port 8080? Is it port 80 in the container? And seeing those mappings, I think would be very useful, like in that tray. Because those are things that would be in the inner loop of what you're trying to do all the time.
Yeah. Do we have anybody from Cockpit here? I don't know. No, I don't think so. All right. Anders, you've been fooling around with this, so why don't you pipe in?
Yeah, I mean, for the old like Docker machine and so on, it was not uncommon to have like 10 machines. Most of them stopped, and then you can start them, whatever, and so on. So then you're managing a herd of VMs. But this Docker Desktop concept is more different because you have like one magic VM hiding in the background and mounting all the file systems and so on. So having two of those machines might not be so common. It's normally like one machine, but. I guess we haven't really clamped down on the machine thing that blew up on Hacker News before, but there is a slight confusion between the machines at the moment. So I guess that would be because ultimately I see the machine concept in Podman as like going away or being hidden under the covers, so that the users wouldn't really have to care about it. While as the old machine was very much in your face, you had to create a VM and connect to it and so on. So I see them as two like different concepts, similar to as they were different concepts in Docker Toolbox and in Docker Desktop. And I think the thing we're talking about now is the more modern, if you want, the more invisible concept.
Right.
Right, touches on a good point, and this is why I also said it feels like the Docker Desktop part where we talked about before, that local VM is just a small part of the puzzle, while we're actually talking here about is the Docker connectivity switcher or tool or whatever that makes use of that part, and it doesn't have to be purely part of that. It's just, in other words, another Podman environment. It could be any other Podman environment that you want to have a look on, what the status or the view of that is, hence running containers, etc.
Yeah.
I mean, so in terms of application, I think as a developer, I would probably have the systray only manage the VM start and stop and selecting a connection and stuff. And then there could be another desktop application to manage your containers, but
How would you?
I'm not sure.
Would you also want it to manage the life cycle of the VM? So
yeah,
instance,
probably. I mean,
if it's
everything
Core OS,
related to
just
the VM.
basically the VM. Yeah.
But making an interface to the whole concept of containers and how they map and so on, I think that's a bigger scope. But my only comparison would be we had a package management utility, and then you had a tray application that will show you that you have an update. And then you had to, when you activated that, you had a choice of either upgrade or you could open the Synaptic or what have you package management interface and view the actual packages. And that was a separate application. So this would be more like start and stop. Is it running? Is it not running? Kind of thing. And then what it was running would be a different application or a different tray, in my point of view, as a developer.
Would we want any other information in like how much disk space is available inside of the VM or how much?
Possibly.
Like the versioning of Podman. Podman
Yeah,
info.
Podman info
basically.
would
Yeah.
Podman info be the thing.
Yep.
Yeah, anything beyond Podman info, I think we start to get into the weeds at that point, and there's a team of engineers working on something like Cockpit that, to me, just feels like Cockpit deal with anything beyond that.
What do one of the things that was brought up to Dan and I yesterday was that some companies don't allow their employees to run brew. And we were curious what people thought about that, and whether, we also need to focus on a pure Mac solution, so to speak, that did not use brew to get the stuff installed. People have comments there?
I think brew is of concern when you productize something and make it for the enterprise. This is what, for instance, for us, CRC is of value. When we, for instance, did mini shift, people were quite happy pulling it from brew. And the problem that we were seeing for our solution is the one that we did downstream, the CDK implementation, the productized one. That would conflict because you saw people filing issues that we would never see because the way they build it on brew, there were different parts and different components that might be pulled in, etc. So it depends on your target audience, and I don't think in your case it's going to be of much concern. However, yes,
put our Red Hat hats on. There's a lot of enterprise customers who basically are blocking brew from even being used in their environments because they don't want their customer fleet to have access to brew. So they'd rather be able to go to a Red Hat site and say, install me that, give me some of that Podman sugar. Yeah.
Right, but I think the same would go for Shoko install or whatever. It depends if it's offered from a remote site to install and use admin rights already, it feels kind of like, So this is why the route we went for, even Podman Machine in Anders' earlier work, it was a single binary. It was easy to deal with. You install it, you run it, it would work. There were no complexities involved, almost no dependencies. And that is a very ideal situation. But we were also seeing that for us, people were preferring it in a corporate environment to use an MSI, an executable, a full binary that is signed and done. And this is the point. You have to make a decision in that. What do you want to pursue? And I think for now, brew does not feel bad because it does provide you pulling Kramer in, for instance, on Mac.
Yeah, we're not arguing against brew. Brew will always stay. The question is, do we take on the headache of packaging it for people who can't brew? And that might be an internal Red Hat thing because we're already having customers come to us and say, we don't have brew. How do we get this thing? And
it's been very difficult for us, for instance, for CRC now. It's been terrible headaches with how to deal with the MSI signing. Delivering a package on macOS, having the entitlements, signing it, etc. It's complex. No.
Yeah, and I guess that also brings us back to the meeting because the Docker Desktop is for many people a way to install a CLI, so they will never use the GUI. They will just use the one all-in-one installer aspect of it. So in that sense, Docker Desktop means two different things, and that was input for this meeting, if it was about doing a desktop application or if it was about doing a product packaging of Podman for Mac.
I would say,
but
we started out with this. I don't know if Anders, you came in late. I started out with a statement that said, "You'll always have brew install Podman."
Yeah.
To me, we're also going to have brew install Podman Desktop, and brew install Podman Desktop will set up this magical thing, and will require Podman to be installed as well. So, both things will be installable. Well, one is a parent of the other, but you will always be able to install the child directly. The concern we have right now is if we have to, go through the headaches that Gerard is talking about that they have with OCI.
MSI signing, all the certificates.
all that stuff. Yeah, all the stuff that makes people say, "Oh, this is something that's trusted."
Yeah, but I think a lot of, especially the Mac users, they want that all-in-a-box experience. At least that was my. Having packaged things with insane dependencies like GTK and so on for Mac, they wanted a one-click installer for most things.
Go ahead, you.
Yeah, if I can speak from a video game developer perspective, I struggle with my developers as is right now at the moment, getting them not to run as root in containers. So looking at trying to adopt Podman Desktop for a Mac OS solution. It doesn't have to be an exact one-to-one, but if I can get it, if it can be close to 80 or 85% of what the desktop does as far as the DMG or the app package or whatever it needs to, and it's the click install and what they're used to, that's a huge win for, getting them to understand that there are different container technologies out there besides just Docker, and that this is, having worked prior at Red Hat doing OpenShift, I know Podman is, just as good, if not better, in a lot of ways than what Docker is. But it's trying to fight with my developers, to win hearts and minds there that this is a good thing. There is a viable solution, and I don't know, even get them to start providing more feedback from a developer perspective about what's happening in an industry that's not related to what typical Red Hat customers would be, such as FSI or public sector, or we do games. Video game developers, they want to create stuff and they want to get it out on the market as fast as possible, and trying to help them do that it's a daunting task at times. It's fun, but it's a daunting task. So.
Would you guys be disappointed if the based on Fedora version as it is today was what remained in Brew, and a downloadable, isolated from Brew installer and footprint perhaps be branded by a company that has a color in its name?
No, I don't.
Would that be disappointing?
I don't think so at all. Okay. Again, for us, Docker coming out and doing this was kind of like a, way out of left field kind of thing. And I don't think there's any pushback from using a Red Hat branded product or whatever. There are a lot of people within the company that are champions of trying to engage more in the open source community as a whole and see the value in participating in it. Again, I'm just looking at it from the developer perspective of if I can get 85%, in a client for Mac of what they're used to with Docker, that's a huge win for us in terms of getting them to understand they have options besides going, well, we just need to go ahead and just, use Docker because that's what we're most familiar with.
Okay.
But I didn't know, you mentioned very clearly you would not want your developers to run root inside the container, right? Is that one of your most important use cases?
I would prefer not to, working on the InfoSec side if they did that. But we're making a transition from DCOS into EKS and Kubernetes as it is right now. So if they have to run root because that's the way the game service and the microservice architecture is done currently, then I'm not going to fight them on it. But I'm going to try to put guardrails in place to protect them from bad and nefarious things happening that they did not anticipate.
Right. Okay. So I can interpret it as you'd rather want to be kind of like, if the desktop application would make you aware of security constraints or security implications, you think that is valuable. Because this is the point where Daniel, for instance, mentioned he would like to have those 4 different options about the configuration. And it could be kind of like, as I would envision, something like a compatibility slider that you move around inside your configuration, your local VM. And this basically sets your connection string. And therefore, hey, now you're root, and therefore, you're on the risky side of stuff. Or,
that would be helpful. I guess the best way to put it is from that perspective, because everything's had to run as root in a container prior, and you've had to have these elevated privileges. We're trying now to, as an organization, become a young adult. We're trying to figure out how to young adult pay bills, pay rent, do adult things, and the process is trying now to get developers from always defaulting as root within containers and using root because that's what they know, to a more safer and sane solution going forward in this container orchestration and cloud native world.
I mean, Podman is actually, you're really running as sort of a fake root, inside of a user namespace is really what we're doing. And I think what you would like to get to is the sort of non-root, even in a rootless container, is really what the goal should be for. I have a hard time envisioning why in a desktop app you need to have root at all, but for a game app, other than maybe loading some kind of kernel module chicanery or something.
It's just what they've defaulted to.
It's actually the whole Docker world is defaulted to running everything as root. So it's not. I have a feeling it's just that the images that they pull start as root, and so therefore they think, you got to run as root. Yeah.
They don't change users. They don't change ownership. They just
Right.
take it, do what they got to do, put their game binaries in, and go from there.
Yeah. They're app developers. They're not caring about security. So. All right, so I think we have some ideas. I think that we're supposed to have multiple sections of this today, right, Tom?
Yeah, the other topic that we had was Podman machine volume mounts. And we also have an open forum for open questions, but we've got about 20 minutes left, 25 minutes. So if we want to move on, we can, or if we can keep going if people have more questions here.
So anyways, we'll write up what we believe, and we're definitely looking for helpers to, contributors to make, whether we call it Podman Desktop or not, but everybody gets the idea. The GUI of Podman for a Mac, and potential, as Brent said in the beginning, we'd potentially want to have something that would work on other platforms, Linux and Microsoft.
That's where I would want to ask the group a question, because Dan, you and I are self-admitted Linux-only users. For those that have some Mac expertise or have had to support multiple platforms, are we stuck with Swift as the only language to write this tray in? Can people advise?
Okay, so from what we did, I don't want to talk about legacy or dictating you what to do, just more like lessons learned. We did for Minishift a tray application using Go, and we used a cross-platform library like Lantern. They had an implementation for dealing with their security tools, and it allowed you to do stuff in the system tray on both macOS and Linux and Windows. The problem that we ran into is there was not enough options to really tightly integrate with the operating system. You were always limited, and several things like even a context menu or submenu was problematic, and we needed to add development or at least functionality to make that work. So we found that kind of like it held us back from being very integrated with the system. So with that as lesson learned, we did the completely different thing for CRC. We go the native route, and we wanted to use Swift on macOS and .NET on Windows. And the problem that we were seeing is they are so very different in their approach that we were never on feature parity between them. We always had issues trying to catch up between them. It takes so many of your cycles away. But if we would have taken a non-native solution of a solution like real cross-platform, we would never have that crispy, nice feel that people want, because macOS developers and people are looking for that, but it doesn't feel native. And this is the problem that we were dealing with. So now we're trying to look into, but what if we do Electron and we make it explicitly not natively looking, but tying into, for instance, the look and feel of the branding that we have, and therefore explicitly deviate from that? Would that be a better experience? So far, I have noticed that the development that we do was much quicker. It's going to take a lot more cycles to do the actual styling with CSS and stuff. It's not completely fully integrated, but at least we can provide something that feels good enough. Does that provide any insights?
I was just curious what Electron was, if I'm the only one asking the dumb question.
Electron is a development framework that uses the Chrome render engine for HTML pages. So you're writing your logic in Node.js and JavaScript, and any of the dialogues that you instantiate are actually web pages. So you have HTML buttons, labels, and stuff. And you have to write logic to actually deal with it as a web page. But the quality of that is you can use CSS to completely style it into your look and feel. So.
Thank you.
Go ahead, you.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I mean, we're heavy users of code around here at Riot. So if you went with a non-native UI toolkit like Electron, I don't think you'd get much pushback from people like us. Again, it's, you know, delivering 85% of the functionality that we've got right now, whether it's Electron or Swift, or if you wanted to do .NET Core and provide like delivery that way. I don't think it really matters.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Jared. I was busy taking notes. Is Electron, the output from that, is that usable across all the platforms, macOS, Windows, and Linux?
Yes.
Okay.
There are some caveats, of course. Some of the code that you do have to rep with, for instance, if macOS or whatever, there's functionality for that to inspect platform. But in general, we have noticed that it would be feature parity among all the platforms because it's a single code base targeting all of them. They have even a builder framework to provide installers for these platforms. And see it this way, VS Code is based on Electron. The GitHub client is based on Electron. Zettler, a Markdown editor, is based on Electron. So there are many examples out there that actually use this as the cross-platform solution. However, and there's been some pushback, recently one of the very famous login applications for password management, etc., I forgot the name. I forgot the name, but they started to provide a solution where they were writing Rust applications for the backend and a UI application written in Electron. And a lot of people were saying, since the preference box doesn't move, it's not a native solution. And what they were trying to do, they wanted to mimic the look and feel of macOS in Electron on top of macOS. And that's something that I would say that doesn't feel right, because people will feel that. That's kind of like trying to do a Microsoft Office, which is a clear recompilation of the Windows app on top of macOS. That's never going to work. It has to be defined and styled differently or specific for the platform.
Are any additional runtimes needed for Electron applications?
It has Node.js included with the render engine.
Okay.
All right, that's all good input. That's great input. Let's talk about volumes.
And who's leading that one? Is that Giuseppe or you, Dan? Or?
I'll take it.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, okay, go for it.
Brent, if you were saying that you wanted it, you can have it too, but I just wanted to.
no, I was curious if you're prepared to, this is Mac volumes, right?
Yeah. So
Okay.
I just want to briefly go on where we are, where we want to be in a few weeks, and where we want to be in, say, a year. So where we are right now is no native support. People are hacking together solutions that will introspect into Podman to get the SSH connection, SSH in, and then establish an SSHFS reverse mount from the VM back to the host. Where I would like to be very soon is a solution where we have a flag to Podman machine, where when you start, or when you create probably, a VM, you will be able to mount certain content from the host into that VM. Exact nature of those mounts very much still to be debated. There are so many different ways to accomplish a mount from the host into a VM. Should it be a reverse mount? What protocol should you use, etc. But we want to get something out quickly to allow you to at least mount content from the host into your virtual machines. And then in about a year, I would really like to see Podman with a native support for this. So you wouldn't have to worry about, I'm going to need to use the following directories in my virtual machine. We're going to, if I say make a Podman run -v/temp/temp, it will automatically take /temp from the host and mount it into the container inside the virtual machine. Now that one is longer term and significantly more complicated because we don't really have a plug-in infrastructure for volumes that could support it right now. We'd have to hook the code in a bunch of places to make that happen. So this is a very much a longer term thing, and I don't think we need to do much discussion on it here because architecting that is going to take quite a while. What I would like to discuss is a quick short-term solution. And it seems like Anders has a pull request out, which is going to do that. Anders, can you expound on what you've got out?
Yeah, so there is a built-in system called VertFS in QEMU that would use 9p under the covers. So you have one flag to QEMU that creates a mount, and then you mount it inside your VM using the normal mount -t. So that is what I did. The problem was on the Mac was just as with the HVF, the 9p for Darwin hadn't been merged, even though being submitted in 2018 or something. So you had to merge yet another branch into your QEMU and build it. But for myself, I also had to rent a Mac in the cloud to run it on. But other than that, it seemed to be working. There seems to be some timing differences between Linux and Mac. So the PR I have out, it works fine on Linux, but it has some issues on a real Mac still.
So the use case would be, say I take my home directory and I mount it into the VM underneath the /mount directory inside the VM. Yes. If I do a Podman run -v, do I have to do mount /homedir / okay, so I have to prefix everything with
so there needs to be some kind of transparent integration with Podman so that it would know to prefix with a mount when running in a VM or something like that.
Yeah.
And none of that is in this PR, so it's very much in your face. The only thing that is semi extendable is the use of volumes and mounts. So you could envision mounting the requested volumes in a different way. So the -v is just strings, and then the mounts comes with different file systems.
Go ahead, Tom.
Anders, could I ask you to link the PR in the chat?
Will do.
Thank you.
Right now, does Docker Desktop do what Matt wants to do a year from now?
From my understanding, yes. I haven't. I've installed it. I've done some limited testing, and it definitely does handle this natively in that they actually have several mount options dedicated to this. So you can decide how exactly the mount is handled for performance reasons. No matter how you do this, you're going to run into perf issues. If you do a reverse mount, you may have some startup time issues because we're going to have to rsync all the content from the host into the virtual machine potentially. But at the very least, you will have very fast access from the container to the mount. So that'll be fast. It's basically a trade-off as to how you want to do that, and Docker exposes that trade-off to the users from what I've seen.
Because I began opening up discussion with the file system team at Red Hat about VirtIOFS and seeing about if that could be rerunning on a Mac, because obviously they've been working a lot to get that to be highly performant. But I have no, but I have a feeling that's going to take a little bit of time to get that up and running as a potential alternative to 9P or SSHFS.
Oh, in my eyes, that's not really the big issue. The big issue is the Podman remote client has to know enough to make these mounts in Cabal. Either that, or if it's SSHFS. Sorry, I can't talk today. If it's SSHFS, we're going to have to SSH into the VM, do a reverse SSHFS, or just do a forward SSHFS from the client. But basically, the Podman remote client is going to have to be a lot smarter than it is right now. That is the biggest obstacle for doing this natively. Doing this the way Andrews is doing, we can do that quick, and it gets people something. So that's what I would like to get out in the near future.
No, I agree. I think that solution, putting the smarts into the user is the best quick solution. Obviously,
I mean, one concern we also had was exporting your home directory into the VM. But that never seemed to bother the Docker people, so we didn't do anything about it. But it's basically sending all your home files into this potentially unknown environment.
Here's my SSH keys. Random VM.
Exactly. Yeah.
Go nuts.
Yeah, so that's. I mean, that was one of the reasons why I flipped it for the Docker machine and Podman machine to only SSHFS forward and not reverse. It's inconvenient for the user, but it's also more performant and more secure. So.
For Minishift, we did the same thing. We used SSHFS because it was for the same reasons. We avoided, for instance, the whole 9P story.
How does SSHFS perform? Does it feel natural?
It felt natural to the people, at least that we dealt with, and we were able to offer that on all the platforms, so macOS, Windows, and Linux. And that was the advantage. And we had native solutions from Golang that we could deal with that.
The main problem is if you do something that is stat intensive, like git status or make or something like that, or find is also another scary command. Then you will hit the network and it will be 5 or 10 times as slow as doing the same thing.
Right.
So instead of using SFTP, you would probably want to use SSH and run the find command on the remote host if you were aware that there was a remote host. So it's like, you have the same problem with an NFS mount.
Right.
So there's the same issues.
If we and as long as we isolate Podman build from that, that's the most likely case where that would get hit, right? I mean, I don't think we want people mounting volumes into mounting storage for their volumes. I mean, storage for their images from the Mac into the VM.
No, it was for, when you do like compile a C++ program or something like that.
Right.
So you're using Docker to set up your build environment, not necessarily for Docker images, or container images, but for something else.
Right.
So then you get hit, and that was my main use case, so that's why I avoided it.
Right.
The other advantage of using something that is so ubiquitous SSH is, of course, if you do talk about the remote scenario, if you do want to have something that runs remotely, you want to be able to mount something in that other host or whatever, then doing something that can be proxied out or multiplex or whatever doing during another SSH connection does make sense.
Yeah. All right. I think SSH is the way to go, at least for the first instantiation of this thing.
Yeah, we can interface that all in so that it can be swapped out. Yeah,
Yep.
that should be no problem.
All right. Well, we get less than 10 minutes left, so we're supposed to open it up to questions at this point or comments. Or good job, guys who work on Podman machine type things.
I'm curious about the WSL2 implementation. I've done a lot of work or trying to get Podman running optimally on that environment, but I see that a lot of stuff, like let's say Microshift as an example, does rely on services like systemd, firewalld, etc. And this is the problem if we're offering a WSL2 approach using Fedora or whatever as an image, as a base. There's a lot of workarounds that are needed to make that work. Is that something that's already being done or looked into, or?
Yeah, we have. Hold tight, it's coming. We have a document or maybe even a script to run that'll just do it.
Okay. Would I be able to see?
We're also talking directly to Microsoft about
Right.
how we can make it less of a pain in the ass to.
Right, and this is the point.
We
We have been doing similar because I've worked already for quite a long time on that same story when Fedora wanted to get images out that was going into the Windows Store, and on legal issues we were not able to do that, for instance. So I would like to see if there's any kind of documentation or a PR that I can have a look at so I can see where things go. And because I've been trying to solve that story a lot with Genie, for instance, trying to find a workaround to get systemd up and running in the WSL2 environment, but it has been a pain in the ass. Sorry, Mike, I want to speak up.
So again, in the interest of time, hold tight. It's coming. It's coming from someone not on our team. So I think I'm hesitant to make promises as to when.
But sure, I understand.
Yeah.
But it should be here very soon.
The
Right, and good point, Lima. Interesting point of view, yeah.
Yep. No, Lima is very cool.
On the WSL front, I'll just say that we don't strictly require systemd or firewalld or any of those things that are missing. Podman will quite happily run on such a system.
Right.
If you're trying to stack stuff on top of Podman, like Minishift, that will be a problem. But right now, Podman itself will run a WSL like that.
Right, and that's the point what I mean with the expectation. Podman will work, but other stuff that might require something around that might not. And that's kind of like, you expect more because I've been able to do that on my Fedora VM with Podman or whatever, and that worked. And when I'm doing it on Windows with WSL2, it does not. Why is that? It's the same, right? It's a VM.
It's coming.
Right, okay.
Any other questions, comments?
Well, just a quick back question. Gerard, do we have your contact information, or do you have our contact information?
Oh, I do. I talk with Dan occasionally, and Valentin Robert. So.
Okay, great. Just as long as we know how to get a hold of you.
And Scott, of course, also. So I'll keep in touch for sure.
Okay.
I have a question for the group if there are no other questions, but I would prefer that they get the chance to go. Any more questions from the group about anything?
So what would be the monthly cost for Podman Desktop, Brent?
You already paid it.
$4.99. $4.99.
I'm
$6.99, I think you mean.
I'll give you our Venmo account so you can transfer us whatever money you want to give us.
No, I mean,
Red Hat can't find out about it.
All jokes aside, I do think that they include some kind of hosting option with it. So your dollars will buy you some hosting, and the equivalent hosting package isn't, free either. So if you bundle hosting into it, there could be some deals to be made. So you could have your Quay.io or Podman.io or whatever host.
Yeah, we would just guarantee the Red Hat. That this will always be open source and will always
Right.
be provided as the primary package. If Red Hat wants to, if Red Hat wants to service their enterprise customers with something slightly different, you know, the free stuff will, you know, there'll always be a Fedora for the RHEL. There'll always be a free version of Podman, you know, totally free. Free isn't, you can do anything you want, and free isn't beer.
So the question that I do have around that is, what is the ETA? And what kind of time frame are we talking that you want to have an MVP or a proof of concept or a first implementation of this? Because I can imagine from the announcement, the upheaval that now exists, people want to have quick and quick and quick. We want something. And I can understand we would also like to move quickly. But what is that? Tomorrow, yeah, sure. I understand that. But that's not going to happen. You first have a document to write.
What I'll tell you what I have in my mind as far as things that need to be done. We need to solve the volume thing. We've got a PR from that, and I have to admit I had to step away, so I missed the subsequent that or catch on. So we need to get that done. We need M1 support to be proper, like it is with Intel. That theoretically could be done today, but they keep changing the upstream patches in QEMU. So they changed overnight when we had agreement to put it in brew to yesterday. So now we're waiting again. So those two things need to be done first and get, as you guys may know, the M1 support is turned off. We just actually don't let you use it in 3.3. So we would need to re-enable it. And then we would begin to look at this. This issue, we have to make some decisions. I'm sure that there's still debate. If it's Node.js, there's nobody on my team that knows that already. So we would be looking at someone either needs to learn it or we would be looking at getting help. And I think those are the top kind of things on our mind. We've already got a release queued that fixes a bunch of stuff. So that's coming out very soon as well.
I think from a open source point of view, January 1st is the deadline for us to have something because that's when people are actually going to have to start spending the money on Docker. And that's the next phase when, you know, what happened 2 weeks ago was a total surprise to us. And, you know, we weren't quite ready. You know, the Podman team wasn't quite ready for it, although I was very pleased. Actually, I was on vacation when this all happened, and I was happy that we worked as well as we did. But the next big moment is going to be January when people actually have to start writing checks.
And I just want to clarify that because we're past time as well.
Yeah.
That the January 1st is a proposal or plan put together, not the actual project.
I'd just say the project has, you know, that date is when we have to have something of quality that people can, you know, how do I get off of Docker Desktop? Oh, this Podman Desktop is now available. Our goal, in my opinion, is we're going to have stuff every week, right? Right now, Matt has started on Podman, a new release of Podman coming out, and 90% of what's in that, or a lot of what's in that, is actually fixes for problems that people have found on a Mac. So, you know, it's going to be, you know, getting in volume support, getting in the remote sockets so people can run Compose against the sockets, getting in M1, which is probably the highest important one. So those are all things not to do with the Podman Desktop, the Podman Machine stuff, but we'll be rolling that out as quickly as we can.
And are you saying January 1st for both Mac and Windows?
I think both are going to happen earlier than January 1st. I'm just saying January 1st. January 1st is a marketing event that we have to be ready for. The open source community. We have to provide a solution for these people that are going to be looking for an alternative. It's more on a Mac. You know, that's a date related to Mac. I think our experience in Windows is decent right now. There is fairly easy to use on Windows. As I don't know, there's been 2 or 3 articles written on how to use Podman on a Windows platform already. But I'd like to get better, obviously. But
Right. I'm just looking at our clock and we're past time at this point in time. So are there any other quick last questions?
I just have a quick one. Did anyone, has anyone, there's a complaint that Podman machine using build is significantly slower, like 50x slower than Docker. I'm just curious, has any of you seen that? And if so, would you be willing to give us examples of what you're doing so that we can see what might be going on? I'll just put that out. You can hit me up on IRC or anywhere else.
Brian, the person who reported that did actually, they posted the Docker file they were using. Let me link it to you.
Did they? Great. All right. That helps. But it also helps if people have an actual Docker desktop installed somewhere.
Right, and that's
I don't
what I'm
do it.
quantified. Have tests run and have an indication between them.
Yeah.
What I would like for the next agenda would be kind of like one of the discussions then, if you want to move quickly, what's the consideration of having, if you want weekly releases or whatever, doing something with public CI, because you do need to target in that case something like Circle CI for macOS development, app layer for Windows, etc. Because these then, in that case, you need to have ready. You need to want to roll quickly.
Our current CI solution has support for macOS and Windows. We just need to put the pieces in there.
I'm not aware. Sorry.
Yeah, it's okay.
Right, folks, I'm going to, because most of us have another meeting that we were supposed to go to 5 minutes ago, going to wrap up this one with a reminder that we are meeting next on Thursday, October 21st, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, again, and just to thank you all for being here today and contributing. It's been a great discussion. Thank you all.
thanks. Bye now.
Thank you.